Good evening. I would entertain a motion to go into open session, moved by Councillor Foxton, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? That is carried. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Councillor Harris.
I believe I have one under item number 1, the community services agenda. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yes, it does.
All right.
Thank you. So the first duty we have at this council meeting is one that gives me great pleasure. If David Willmott's face looks familiar, it should, and he's actually hiding over there in the audience. He attended Regional Council meeting in late June this year, so we could recognize him as Senior of the Year. An award he was nominated for by the former regional employee through the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport, the Ontario Honours and Awards Secretariat. As some of you may recall, David was a volunteer with the Canadian Revenue Agency in 2001 under the Community Volunteer Income Tax Program. It's known as the CVITP. This program helps low-income residents complete their annual income tax returns. The region of Waterloo inherited David as a volunteer from the CRA in 2008. David has volunteered his services to numerous agencies during tax seasons and completes approximately 1,100 tax returns annually. David is a resident of Kitchener, but 2 to 3 days a week during tax season, he drives to our Cambridge office at 150 Main Street to provide drop-in tax clinic services. He does this at his own expense. He does this because he knows that there is a need for this service throughout Waterloo Region. David recognizes that the income tax system has become an increasingly important source of financial support to low-income individuals and families. He is motivated by the fact that filing taxes has become more important so that they can access benefits through this system. David, you have made our community a better place by volunteering your skills and your services. So much so that he was nominated for the Sovereign's Medal for Volunteers. And I'd also like to note that Mr. Willmott's nominator, the former regional employee, Bob Teese, is in the audience as well. This medal recognizes exceptional volunteer achievements from across Canada and abroad. It recognizes Canadians who have made a significant, sustained, and unpaid contribution to their community. It gives me great honor to present the Sovereign's Medal for Volunteers to David Willmott on behalf of Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Julie Payette, Governor-General of Canada, in recognition of his extraordinary volunteer efforts in Waterloo Region. David, would you please join me at the front? So again, David, congratulations on amazing contribution to our community. We have 2 delegations registered. The first is Mike Pereira, University of Waterloo, Research and Technology Park Station Area Improvements. Welcome. Mike, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to everyone about this. I was asked to come by some of the planning staff and also on behalf of the group. So to give some context, I manage the Research and Technology Park for the University of Waterloo. I also chair the steering committee for what's known as Idea Quarter, which is a collective of all the businesses and property owners across both the Research and Tech Park and along Phillip Street and Albert Street, so that business cluster up there. We just wanted to sort of provide a little bit of historical context as to why the station area around the Research and Technology Station is so important. So a number of years ago, due to the placement, let's say suboptimal placement of a signal box within the research park for the LRT station, it created some significant visual barriers and a bit of an eyesore, frankly, within the research park and right next to the plans for Evolve 1. Through discussions with the region, we understood it was really going to be cost prohibitive to move the box, and at that time we had a commitment of $1.8 million to create an area around the LRT station to really create a kind of a central plaza and a community space for the sort of 8,000 employees that are currently there and projected to double in size in the next 5 years along that corridor. This was before Evolve 1 was built. That was about 4 years ago. Since then, we've gone through multiple cycles of planning. We had GSP Group design a beautiful park with a lot of outdoor workspace. Due to budgetary concerns, those plans have been scaled back. I understand the reasons for those. A number of the stakeholders weren't particularly pleased, but we understand that this is an evolving process. But what we are now looking at is the day the LRT launched, the site that we're looking at, which was sort of carved out a number of years ago to be the station area, is basically overgrown with weeds, filled with plastic and garbage, and frankly does not reflect, I don't think, what we hope will be the symbol of the ION LRT station next to Canada's most sustainable building. It was a pretty hard pill to swallow on opening day of the LRT when there were plastic bottles piled up in the and spray paint cans in the station area around the ION next to the most sustainable building in all of Canada. So this project is now, was meant to be completed 2 years ago and be done in time for Evolve 1's grand opening. Evolve 1 is coming up on its 1-year anniversary. So what we're hoping is that the station area improvements will be approved to go forward, because if they don't, we don't know what happens to the funding for that project afterwards. My understanding is it has a timeline of March. Which it has to be spent by. So if we don't do construction soon, we will run into problems of being able to complete the original plan. Well, not the original plan, the updated plan. This is a very important piece for the research park and the surrounding area. It's going to shift, I think, the center of gravity for that region from being sort of split between Albert and Phillip a little bit and near the Accelerator Center a little bit to creating a really central hub across this entire innovation district. We have a number of Waterloo region's leading tech companies are choosing to locate in there. Some of our fastest growing firms, some of our very well-established firms, and then hundreds of startups. It's the central hub and one of the largest employment lands in the region. That district, Idea Quarter, represents 1/3 of all the employment land in the city of Waterloo. That hub has huge potential for growth, and it's a real opportunity for us to create an incredible central space to anchor the entire district around. So I'm really hoping we can move forward with the plan as it's proposed and recommended by regional staff. But I'm happy to, if there are any questions about this or kind of the history around it.
I see no questions. Thank you very much. And you had 46 seconds to spare, so thank you.
Thanks very much.
So council, often we will pull recommendations forward when there's been a delegation. Does council want to deal with the recommendation, which is on page 38?
I'll move it.
Okay, I saw two hands, so moved by Councillor Vrbanovic, seconded by Councillor Jaworski. Any discussion? Councillor Jaworski.
I'd just like to thank Michael for coming out for the presentation. Councillor Fox and I were chatting. It's too bad we didn't have pictures to actually show the amount of investment that we're making here, how good it will do. And I do think it's a good investment. It does cost a fair bit, but it will be certainly changing an eyesore into the beauty that the LRT station was meant to be in the Research and Technology Park.
It's wonderful, and it is partnering with senior levels of government to create this kind of infrastructure, and although it's not fully funded by them, that partnership helps go a long way. All those in favor? Any opposed? One opposed? Do you want to be so recorded, Councillor Strickland? Okay. Okay. That is carried. Thank you. The next delegation is Andreas Fuentes Martinez and Kai Reimer-Watts. Welcome.
Hello. At all of our other presentations, we had 10 minutes, so we're going to try to keep this concise.
You got 5, so talk fast.
All right. So we want to first thank you for considering this motion. My name's Kai, colleague Andreas, and we're part of a group that has been spearheading these motions across the region, and we've been very excited by the momentum and the response. We live in quite an incredible region, and people are clearly ready to step up, and that's what this motion is all about. Is our clicker working?
I won't deduct that from your time if it's slow.
Sorry about that. So every day I think we wake up and look at the news headlines and we see the ever increasing impacts of climate change on our world, both globally and locally, destroying the world that we love. So these are just some of the headlines that I pulled out that depict a wide array of climate impacts and devastation. But of course, there are many, many more, and they are accelerating. So both Kai and myself went through the Masters of Climate Change program at UW. And this is a chart from the International Panel on Climate Change from their special report on 1.5 degree temperature increase that was released last fall in October. And it shows the cumulative CO2 rise since 1876, as well as the surface temperature rise that correlates with it. As you can see, we're already locked into 1 degree of warming, and we're very quickly approaching 1.5 degrees. We'll probably reach it within 2020 to 2030 if we don't do anything about that. And the key thing about 1.5 is that in this IPCC report, it was noted that that is kind of a threshold of where we start seeing more dangerous impacts and much larger impacts on the world, as well as was part of the Paris Agreement that the world signed several years ago. So this really illustrates the need to act now if we are to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. This need for immediate action is part of why we need to acknowledge that this is an emergency.
So as usual, people around the world are well ahead of the politics on this. Just a few weeks ago, over 1 million people across Canada, 7 million worldwide, striked for climate justice and action to address what we all realize is an emergency situation and a threat to our very futures. This includes people from all walks of life who recognize that the lives of millions are going to get tremendously worse and more difficult in the years to come without ambitious action today. It's inaction at this point that is really the most dangerous. So folks know this is an emergency. They're demanding now that our political leaders also recognize that and act accordingly. In turn, I think it's important to emphasize that this community is going to be there to back all of you up in taking the ambitious actions that are needed. As you can see from the over 5,000 people who showed up to our own region's climate strike. So this really illustrates what leadership can look like.
So speaking more specifically to the climate emergency motion, this is part of a growing international movement of cities, regions, and even countries that have recognized that we are in a climate emergency. This covers over 260 million citizens around the world. For years, we've let our emissions get away from us just like a runaway train. And the small efforts that we've been applying to try and slow us down have been grossly inadequate. This lack of necessary action has now put us in a position where we are running out of track, and we need to pull the emergency brake. We need to pull the emergency brake today, and that is what this motion signifies.
So the number one reason we need to declare a climate emergency is simply because that's what it is. Both Andreas and I went through a master's in climate change, and that term certainly can make this issue sound very gradual and non-threatening, which is absolutely not the situation we're in. The second point is that we have had decades of incrementalism that have led us exactly to this moment where we now find ourselves in dire need of bold leadership to set us on a far more sustainable pathway. We've let the embers burn until, as Greta was quoted, our house is now on fire, meaning it is no longer a crisis, it is an emergency. The third point is that we're already seeing increasing local climate impacts all around us, and these impacts will be disproportionately borne and already are as increasing costs to our local governments and communities, particularly the most vulnerable. Without bold action now, we know these are going to get worse and quite likely accelerate beyond human capacity to manage. They will eventually overwhelm us without strong action. This would lead to chaos. So action now clearly matters to avoid this and set us on a pathway that's in line with the science and really any deeper sense of human morality that this moment demands. And I would emphasize that we are also in advance of a federal election where making these kinds of statements matters more than ever.
But to ensure that action goes beyond just rhetoric, accountability is clearly important. And that's why our proposal also includes the idea of a carbon budget, which would basically treat emissions as we treat money in the budget process. Just like everything the region does has a financial cost, it also has emissions costs that need to be measured and accounted for in order to begin reducing it. By introducing it as a budget, it means people in the different departments start realizing that emissions cost of their daily activities. This empowers staff who know their department better than anyone else to help find efficiencies. And on the other hand, it also means that council has to ensure that the operations of the corporations comply with the emissions that were budgeted for that year. Just as there is no money, you can't build or operate something. If there's no emissions, we also can't do it, or we need to find more efficient ways to do it. This budget also adds measurable value to things that may not have been assigned value in the past, such as encouraging green infrastructure like trees, which help with stormwater and pollution, or more efficient buildings like Valve 1, which was just mentioned.
So I think we can mostly skip the amendments at this point, but we do want to emphasize that this motion has also been developed as part of ongoing discussions with Sustainable Waterloo Region, especially the carbon budget. So SWR does see value in this proposal and will be a valuable partner for coordinating the most efficient action across the municipalities. And I'll let you speak to the movement.
And so tonight's motion builds on the momentum that we've been working on region-wide, as well as across the country and the globe. Just last night, the Township of Wellesley unanimously declared a climate emergency and moved forward on the carbon budget. Last week, Toronto unanimously declared a climate emergency following on the momentum of the climate strikes that we've mentioned earlier, with a detailed breakdown of actions that was actually quite impressive. And there's really no excuse to not show our leadership here tonight in our region for our kids and for all future generations that are counting on us.
So we just have a brief 30-second video. I don't know how to play this, but I think Andreas...
That require a global response. We need concrete action. We need 100% transition to renewable energy long before 2050. We need our institutions to divest from fossil fuels.
Which side are you on now? Which side are you on? Which side are you on now? Which side are you on?
So this is all already happening in our region, and we're grateful for your support in moving this forward today, and the community is going to be there to back up bold action as we move forward. Are there any questions around this
So
motion?
you did very well. You probably figured out I gave you each 5 minutes, right? So you didn't have to squeeze it all
That's
into
what I was
5
counting
minutes.
on, but
I have a few questioners. First, Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you, through the chair, Andreas and Kai. Thank you very much. You know, I really struggle with the word emergency because I feel it downplays what we're dealing with here. And I like the word crisis better. But I think and the reason for that is if we look at a firehouse, 911, you dial 911, in minute number 1, we dispatch the appropriate resources, all and every available resources, which is typically 2 fire trucks and a total of 8 firefighters. They get there, they have resources of hydrant and water, and they fight it, and long story short, within 30 minutes, the emergency is over. And in this, the emergency isn't going to be over. The emergency isn't going to be over in our lifetime. This is going to be something now, a constant fight. But what I really liked, what you said, Andreas, was pulling the emergency brake, pulling the emergency stop, that we have to stop here. So maybe, I think through your presentation, you've given me comfort that the word emergency, and I think Councillor Vrbanovic has given us information as well, that, this is what it's chosen to be called. This is the going name for it. This is going jargon for it. So maybe you could give me comment on emergency versus crisis based on your experience and your thoughts on that.
yeah, so I think you mentioned a couple of the important things. First of all, I think a large part of it is that emergency is what the larger movement has decided to call it, and to be part of that movement, crisis would make us stand out kind of in I think, a negative way.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is exactly what you mentioned in terms of that immediate action. That is what we need right now. When you look at the time periods that we're talking about for climate, which is much longer, I think your 30-minute thing would be the 20 years or 30 years that we have before we have to be carbon neutral, right? So if we look at the actions to stay within 1.5 or 2 degrees, we need to be carbon neutral at the latest by 2050, and we need to be 50% by 2030. And so this gives us such a short time frame to act, that it's that immediate action that I think emergency inspires, that we're really looking for.
I think that's a good answer, the inspiration of that word, and anyway, that was very good. Thank you, Andres.
I just want to point out that the City of Guelph used crisis, not emergency.
Yeah.
So not everybody. I've got Councillor Vrbanovic.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Now I'm ready to move the motion actually and speak to it when the time comes.
Okay, I've got Councillor Shantz. Are you seconding it? Okay. Councillor Vrbanovic, do you want to speak to? Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, thanks.
Do you want to bring your motion forward? It's written in your agenda, starts at the bottom of page 5.
Yes, if I can, Madam Chair, and I'll read the motion and then I'll speak to it. Whereas the Canadian government is committed to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees as per the COP21 Paris Agreement, and whereas Canada's temperature is rising more than double the rate of the rest of the world, whereas cities, communities, and regions are significant contributors to climate change, consuming more than 2/3 of the world's energy and accounting for more than 70% of its carbon emissions. Whereas the region of Waterloo is committed to climate action and understanding our role as a municipality in a globalized world and the need to be prepared for the effects of climate change. Whereas the region of Waterloo has an approved environmental sustainability strategy, which is a detailed strategy for reducing our corporate level GHG emissions with an absolute GHG emissions target reduction of 10% from 2009 levels to 2019. Whereas as of 2017, the region of Waterloo has reduced its corporate GHG emissions by 19% since 2009. Whereas the region of Waterloo is nearing completion of Stage 3 of the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, or ICLEI, Building Adaptive and Resilient Communities Program for Community Climate Adaptation. Whereas the region of Waterloo has committed to community climate action by setting an 80% greenhouse gas emission reduction target from 2010 levels by 2050. Whereas effective accountability is a key element of meeting targets, whereas the cities of Oslo's climate budget allows them to be accountable for their emissions on a yearly basis and to spread the responsibility of emissions reductions across the organization. Therefore, be it resolved that the region of Waterloo declare a climate emergency with the directive to provide continued support to corporate and community climate action at the region and work towards improved targets where possible. Be it further resolved that Council direct staff to investigate in conjunction with our partnership with Climate Action Waterloo Region possible tools to include GHG emission reductions as an integrated component of the region's decision-making processes, including the implementation of a carbon budget for the corporation of the region of Waterloo. And be it finally resolved that based on the results of the carbon budget investigation, it be considered for implementation as part of the 2022 budget process. And it's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Shantz. And if I can speak to it for a moment, please.
Okay.
Colleagues, as we heard from the delegations, the movement across Canada and in fact around the world around the climate emergency is one that has engaged cities in every corner of our planet. In fact, over 1,000 cities worldwide have adopted climate emergency motions, including over 400 cities in Canada alone. In fact, in this region, as was pointed out, Kitchener, Willmott, Wellesley, and Woolwich has already adopted climate emergency motions, and my understanding is that the group is going to be going to the remainder of our municipal councils in the coming weeks. Over and above that, across Ontario, the following municipalities: Barrie, Brampton, Burlington, Chatham-Kent, Greater Sudbury, Halton Region, Halton Hills, Hamilton, Kenora, King Council, Kingston, London, Milton, Mississauga, Oakville, Ottawa, Peterborough, Prince Edward County, St. Catharines, Sarnia, Toronto, Vaughan, West Nipissing, Whitby, in addition to our regional communities, have all adopted climate emergency motions to be part of the global movement that's recognizing that collectively we need to respond to this in an urgent manner, and as organizations also start taking initiatives with our communities to more proactively deal with these issues. As we know, in this region, we're working collaboratively with our colleagues from Climate Action Waterloo Region, and we'll be getting a report in the coming months that is going to say how we're doing, and also giving us a plan as to how we're going to move forward as a community to reach the 2030 targets that have been identified. I do know that in developing this motion, which is a reflection on the ones that have been adopted by our municipalities, I know there has been some concern expressed in dialoguing with staff around the wording of emergency versus crisis. But I think we need to focus on the fact that we're trying here to be part of a global movement and work together with our colleague municipalities. Our strength comes in numbers and the message we jointly receive. When I had the privilege of being in Paris with many other mayors in the lead up to COP21 and ultimately the climate agreement, it was the 800 mayors that were there that were able to speak with one voice and emphasize to people the importance of seeing a global agreement. And even when we saw the United States walk back that agreement under the current administration, it's cities and regions and counties in the United States that have actually stood up and that have driven that agenda forward. So I think it is important that we stand united with our fellow municipalities. When you're doing something in conjunction with so many other groups, yes, the wording may not be perfect. It may not meet the recommendation of Emergency Measures Ontario, but the reality that municipalities representing probably about 3/4 of the population of this province have already adopted similar wording, I think should give all of us comfort that we can proceed with similar wording going forward. So with that, Madam Chair, unless there's any questions, I'll conclude my comments and just ask for a recorded vote at the end.
We have questions. Councillor Galloway.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm fine with the word emergency. I'm not sure that it's all that important, and I know there's a distinction, but I'm fine with the word emergency. In fact, maybe what convinced me is the screening of the film Beyond Crisis, which I attended a week ago, Monday, and the name of the movie was Beyond Crisis. We're past the crisis part. We're into the emergency part. So, and it was a very good film, and I think one that all members of council could possibly benefit from. What I also want to say is that these resolutions are fine. They need to be done. But at the end of the day, it's not the resolutions that gets anything done. It's what we put behind it. And I'm very proud that our strategic plan is really taking a very serious look at climate action, and that the next to last draft, in which we will approve early next month, Mr. Murray is nodding his head. We've created a climate action focus area where we never had one before, and we've created the climate action strategic imperative as well within the plan, and then a whole bunch of actions associated with those particular strategic objectives. And let's not lose sight of some of the work that we've already done at the region. We just opened up a almost $1 billion electric transit system that is taking carbon out off the streets in many respects. And of course, we've been ramping up our transit system, and we've been doing a lot of other things as well, in cogeneration and so on. But there's so much more to do, and I'm really looking forward to our strategic planning, really putting meat on the bones to a resolution like tonight's, and to the strategic plan that we are going to be considering for adopting in early November. So I support the recommendation, Madam Chair.
Councillor Harris.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I guess I have a question for staff. Many folks around the table would likely know what a climate budget is and what it all entails, but for those at home that may not, I'm wondering if somebody can help clarify what all goes into a climate budget and carbon budget, sorry, what did I say? Climate budget.
Michelle?
Carbon budget, sorry, carbon budget.
Through the chair, I'm going to give this a shot. So a carbon budget is based on determining the amount of GHG emissions that can be permitted. It then takes those GHG emissions and sort of assigns them to different parts of the organizations or different activities that we do. And in this way, it's sort of similar to a financial budgeting process. And so it's a possible tool that you could use in order to work to continually make decisions that assist us in reducing our GHG emissions.
And would that typically correspond with the regular budget cycle process?
Through the chair, I think that would be determined as we would move forward. The motion as set out is asking for the ability to go out and look at a variety of tools that we could use as part of our decision making. One of those tools would be a budget. So through that process, we would then determine the appropriate tool for the region and then come back to council.
All right. I do have a couple just friendly suggestions or amendments perhaps to the main motion. I mean, I'm not going to get into the debate of the semantics like other councils I think have across the province. I think we've established the wording here in our region. You know, as Barry had mentioned, this is a global movement, but we have to have local solutions. And I think here in the region of Waterloo, we're well equipped to develop some of those solutions, knowing that technology is going to be a major component of addressing this issue. And so where it's appropriate, but I have it Whereas effective accountability is a key element of meeting targets, I've proposed or will like to propose, and it's up to the mover, that is, whereas the region of Waterloo is a leading science and technology center, home to innovators well positioned to help develop the technologies required to combat climate change and to transition to a low carbon future. And I just have one other quick suggestion at the finally be it resolved line, that based on the results of the carbon budget investigation, any recommendations, so I've added any recommendations, be considered for implementation as part of the 2022 budget process. I mean, it could be about semantics, but an investigation will hopefully likely lead to something. Recommendations is what it may lead to, and that those recommendations be very clear, and public to go through a public budget process. So.
Councillor Vrbanovic, do you need those read back to you, or did you get them written down?
I didn't get them written down, but I'd say they're.
Okay.
I sent them to you by email if you want.
All right. Councillor Shantz, as seconder, you're good with that? Okay. I have no more questioner. The only comment I would make is, and I guess I would pick up on Councillor Galloway's comments, this is a serious motion. We do need to put meat on the bones, and it does need to lead to action. But I want to be really clear. The protocol for declaring an emergency is pretty specific, and I don't know if Mr. Murray wants to touch on it. I do not have any intention of writing to the minister to say I'm declaring an emergency. So I don't want this at all to look as tokenism. This is something we're taking very seriously, and we will action, but I'm not going to follow what's laid out in the legislation. And I'm assuming that, I know one other municipality did and got their hands slapped by the province, so I'm assuming that all of our have any of the councils around the horseshoe sent letters to the minister? Okay. So with that one proviso, clearly I like crisis better than emergency.
Yeah, not expecting you to declare a state of emergency in the region.
As long as we're all clear on that, that's good. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Oh, recorded vote, sorry. Okay.
Start vote.
Hold on, sorry.
Did you vote against it, Barry?
No, I declared a conflict, which I don't have.
Whoa. Thank you, sorry about that. Is that okay?
It's zero.
Take a deep breath.
I fixed it.
That is unanimously carried. I guess it's a secret. It's on my screen. Was it up there? Oh, it's up there now. Okay, so moving along, the minutes of previous meetings, Special Council September 18th, Council September 18th, Community Services October 1st, Finance and Administration for October 1st, Special Council meeting October 1st, Closed Committee October 1st, and Planning and Works October 1st. Could I have a mover for those? Moved by Councillor Vrbanovic, seconded by Councillor Erb. Are there any questions? All those in favor? That is carried. You would have gotten communications electronically. Any questions or comments on electronic communications you've received? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to go into the committee of a whole to consider reports. Moved by Councillor Strickland, seconded by Councillor McGarry. All in favor? That is carried. So we have some reports. First one was dealt with at October 1st special council meeting. The next is the Strange Street water supply system. You have a recommendation as written. Okay, Councillor Strickland is moving all the finance reports, seconded by Councillor Galloway. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. So we've dealt with the recommendation about the Research and Tech Park, which is part of finance. It was already moved. So we're into committee reports, and this is the one where Councillor Harris had a conflict of interest on the first item. and you're all lit up. Can we get rid of the vote, Leanne? It looks right now like you all want to talk. So, Councillor Clark?
So I'll break those out in that case. Starting with the first item, the awards of funding and other actions for the construction of affordable housing. I'll move that.
Seconder, moved by Councillor Lorentz. Any discussion? All those in favor? That is carried. Councillor Clark?
And the response to the province on the proposed amendments to the Ambulance Act. I will move that one as well.
Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Vrbanovic. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Finance and Administration. Hang on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll move the recommendation in finance where we are amending the 2019 to 2028 Transportation and Capital Program by advancing $1.6 million from 2020 to 2019 for the project of Fisher-Holman Road from Plains Road to 500 meters south of Bleams. I so move.
Can I have a seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Foxton. All in favor? That is carried. Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move the 6 recommendations from the Planning and Works Committee.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Jaworski. All in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. CAO. Mr. Murray, do you have any comments? No comments. Any other matters under the Committee of the Whole? Motion for the Committee of the Whole to rise and council to report, moved by Councillor Nowak, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? That is enthusiastically supported. A motion to adopt proceedings of the Committee of the Whole. Moved by Councillor Nowak, seconded by Councillor McGarry. All those in favor? That is carried. We've dealt with the notice of motion. Is there any unfinished business? Councillor Harris?
Other business or new business?
Well, that was next, so unfinished or other?
Other is fine, I'll go to other.
Other? Go for it.
I just want to congratulate Leanne Weitzel's daughter for being crowned Miss Oktoberfest, the pride of Maryhill. I know she'll make an excellent representative of our community during the important festival here in Kitchener-Waterloo, so congratulations again.
She is lovely, Leanne. Councillor Lorentz.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. We kind of whipped through the last few items very quickly, but on the Public Works agenda, item 4, there's a report about the King Victoria Transit Hub. And in the report, it didn't mention the people from this horseshoe that sit on that committee. And I think it's important that that gets included in the minutes, as well as Councillor Sarah Marsh. So we've been working on that transit hub, as you're aware, for a number of years, and I think it's important that the minutes show that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lorentz. Councillor Vrbanovic.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. 2 quick things, and one's a question to Mr. Bartholomew Saunders, and I know we recently dealt with this, but on the issue of the overflow shelter situation for this winter, can we expect a report to come to Community Services next round? I'm asking because we're seeing significant numbers of people. I drove through downtown again last night and found at least a dozen people out at 10:30, and today got another email of several others that I wouldn't have seen from different locations, and I know in speaking with colleagues around here as well as others, we know there's a challenge.
Through you, Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Bartholomew Saunders.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, you can expect to see a report for the November 5th cycle. Staff have been working on and negotiating with agencies and partners to get something ready for November. So you will see something on November 5th.
Okay, is that 2 cycles away or 1 cycle?
1.
One cycle away. Okay.
No, actually two. October 22nd, then November 5th.
Okay. I will say that I did meet with Julian Income and a gentleman by the name of Joseph last week. I referred that to staff. I have invited them to come to committee on the 22nd and speak about their lived experience. They came to our council on Monday night with that story, and I think it would be helpful for council to hear some of that firsthand. They also have a written proposal, which I've shared with council, of some of the things that they're hoping we may be able to look at collectively as part of the solution for what some of the homeless population is dealing with. And then the second issue, a little more positive than that, is just a reminder to everyone that this Friday is the official opening of the 51st annual Oktoberfest. We were in Cambridge today, and Mayor McGarry was a wonderful host, and Councillor Jaworski tells me his lederhosen are out of the closet. The dry cleaners did not shrink them, so everything is good, and the only thing I want to remind everyone is that the opening will be happening at King and Frederick this year as Oktoberfest endeavors to reactivate the whole idea of Willkommen Platz again along King Street.
I still smell like beer from tapping the keg with Mayor McGarry. We did a great job. We sprayed everyone. Sort of on the lines of good news, Mr. Bartholomew Saunders, one of the reports was I sent a letter about the transitional child tax benefit. Could you just give council an update? Lots of agencies know, but I think it is good news.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. The province informally notified all municipalities to stop notifying clients that the transitional child benefit would be terminated and that the clawback on earned income would be terminated or would be changed from the proposal of 75% clawback. Subsequent to that, we received formal correspondence confirming both of those. So in fact, the transitional child benefit will continue, which means that many families will be able to afford housing that they wouldn't otherwise be able to afford, and that the earnings exemptions will remain as they are for the time being.
Thank you. That's really good news. I see no further speakers. I will entertain an act to act the bylaws first, second, and third readings. Moved by Councillor Kiefer, seconded by Councillor Shantz. All those in favor? That is carried. That's good. Okay, we've done it. A motion to adjourn. Councillor Foxton, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Happy Oktoberfest and happy Thanksgiving, everybody.